Hey everyone, Kevin Syracuse with you here as we are officially less than 1 week away from the start of the new league year in the NFL. We've seen a flurry of moves come in over the last couple of days, and it is only going to heat up that much more as we approach this new league year. So starting right off with the Bills, they have made a couple of moves over the last 2 days to get back under the salary cap and try to be competitive as we approach free agency. So last night they released AJ Klein, which saves $5.1 million against the salary cap. And now tonight they released John Feliciano, which saved almost 3.4 million. So as it stands right now, the Bills have roughly $2 million in cap space. Now that is nowhere near enough because I think we can all agree that the Bills need to make a couple of big moves to get over the hump and to be able to beat Kansas City next year and to get to the Super Bowl and then win the Super Bowl, because the Bills are a great team right now, but they are just a couple of pieces away from being a real dominant team. But it's going to be hard because of the salary cap situation. So as much as we all want the Bills to go trade for DK Metcalf, Saquon Barkley, Christian McCaffrey, maybe you're not on the running back train, but a lot of people are, because those are dynamic players that can help the offense. Tyler Lockett's a name that's popped up lately. Now Bobby Wagner with his release. Now there's a report that Tremaine Edmonds could get traded to Pittsburgh, and who knows what we could get in return for there. Someone mentioned Chase Claypool. I don't know. These are all rumors. But regardless, it's going to be very hard for the Bills to do anything based on the money situation. So in my estimate, the Bills still need to clear probably $20 million in order to be competitive and to bring in new players and to be able to re-sign their own. And then they have to save enough money to sign their draft picks once the draft comes. So again, at least 20, maybe even $25 million that Brandon Beane and company have to shave off in order to make the 2022 season a successful one. So when the offseason started, after that tough playoff loss to Kansas City, I immediately started looking at Spot Track and started looking at free agents and contracts, and that was my coping mechanism. I tried seeing who the Bills could sign to take that leap into next year and win that Super Bowl and finally get to the promised land. So luckily, Buffalo Fanatics came out with this offseason simulator, because this has been the answer to all my questions. I have been addicted to it. I've been using it 24/7. And I came up with two simulations that I really like here. And I think this puts into perspective just how hard it is to be a general manager in the NFL and how hard it is to try to get those big name players, but also have to think about the money. Because the other report was Albert Breer came out and said that a big name player reached out to the Bills at the combine, not the other way around. Usually the team reaches out to the player, but this time the player reached out to the Bills and said, "Hey, I want to play for you guys. Can we sit down and try to make a deal work?" Now, Bills Mafia, we're trying to connect the dots here. And the two players that I came up with, maybe three, but the two main ones are Allen Robinson and Chandler Jones. The third one is Christian Kirk. So Christian Kirk was on vacation with Josh Allen, trying to connect the dots there, say, maybe, but he has a market value of probably 13 million. I think that's what Spot Check has been, somewhere around 13 million. So you go back to Allen Robinson and Chandler Jones. Robinson is a guy that he's never had a great quarterback. He is a stud wide receiver, but he's never had a quarterback to prove that he is a stud wide receiver. So this is a guy that might look at the Bills and say, this is a great opportunity, a Mitch Trubisky opportunity for me, where I can go regain my worth. I can regain that stock, have a great season, give them a cheap deal. Maybe we can win a Super Bowl. And then next year I will cash in on a big contract and someone will view me as a wide receiver one again. So if the Bills can somehow pull this off, Stephon Diggs is obviously the number one receiver. Then you have Allen Robinson, and then Gabe Davis. And then if you can re-sign Isaiah McKenzie, and then whoever you draft, that's a really, really good group of wide receivers. And I don't see anyone being able to stop that, especially with the quarterback that we have. But again, it all comes down to the money. So same with Chandler Jones. He might look at his situation and say, I've had a couple of off years. I tore my biceps in 2020. I had a bounce back year this year, but I'm still not at that level that I was at a few years ago. Maybe I'll go back to my hometown team. He's from Rochester, went to school at Syracuse. Maybe he'll give the Bills a deal and say, hey, I want to go win a Super Bowl. Give me a cheap deal. I'm going to prove to the rest of the league that I still have it in me, and then I will cash in next year. So Allen Robinson, Chandler Jones, those are two names that I'm going to keep a lookout for. But going over to the simulation now. So again, trying to be cost friendly here and trying to go through what's going on in Brandon Beane's mind. So with these two simulations, the biggest name that gave me trouble and that pretty much determined where I was going to go in free agency and then the draft was Isaiah Mckenzie. So it's not a guy like Allen Robinson or Chandler Jones or Christian Kirk where you're trying to make that big contract fit. It's Isaiah Mckenzie with his $3.5 million per year contract that was giving me fits the whole time. So with the first simulation, I went through and I cut Cole Beasley, Tyler Matakevich, AJ Klein, Darrell Williams, Cody Ford, and Matt Hawk. So again, you're only allowed to cut 6 players with this simulation. Obviously, the real life Bills can cut whoever they want. But for the sake of this exercise, I cut those 6 players and I had a little over $20 million to work with. So then you go through and you sign whatever players you want. So the only player that I was able to re-sign was Mckenzie. So then I clicked advance, went to free agency, and I said, okay, the biggest need for the Bills is a pass rusher. You're not going to do that in the draft. I mean, you can, but we've seen where that's gotten them over the last few years. Nothing against AJ Epinesa, Greg Rousseau, and Boogie Basham. I think they're going to be great players in this league, but they're not ready yet. They're still developing. They're not the answer to get us over that hump and to beat Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs. The Bills need a dominant, proven veteran pass rusher. So that's why I went to Akeem Hicks, 2 years, $11 million. So only $5.5 million for a guy that's put up some decent years. He can play defensive tackle, defensive end. He's had, I believe, 7, 8, 9 sacks, multiple years. I don't know if he's ever been in the double-digit area for sacks, but he's had a lot of solid seasons where, again, he's been around that 7 to 9 sack range. So I signed Akeem Hicks, and then I signed Jacoby Brissett, 2 years, $10 million. You got to be able to get a good backup for Josh Allen because hopefully something does not happen to him. But if it does, you have to have someone that can step up like Mitch Trubisky and go in and win you a game. So then I looked and I said, where else can the Bills improve? Well, they could use a backup tight end because when Dawson Knox was hurt, they really didn't have anyone to step up in his shoes. And the offense kind of sputtered a little bit. So all these rumors with Rob Gronkowski, that's another big name that's been tied to the Bills. I don't see that happening just because of the money. You might look at the Trey White incident and say, I don't see Rob Gronkowski fitting in this locker room. So be it. So I'm looking at the other Tampa Bay tight end, a nice pass catching tight end, OJ Howard. He's been linked to the Bills before. And with only $2.2 million on the salary cap, that's a no-brainer. Go get him. He can run those seam routes. Dawson Knox can do his thing on the outside. And then you have all the other wide receivers, Mckenzie with the jet sweeps, Stephon Diggs, Gabe Davis, Marquez Stevenson. So I think having a 2 tight end set would add that much more value to this offense. So you had 2 more targets for Josh Allen with Howard and Mckenzie. So you think you probably aren't going to draft a wide receiver as much as people are mocking the Bills to get a wide receiver with the 25th pick. I looked at this and I said, there are a ton of stud cornerbacks, and that's another position that the Bills really need help with. That was another big reason why, in my opinion, we cannot beat Kansas City this year. Trey White is hurt with his ACL injury. We don't know when he's going to be back. Dane Jackson is solid, but he's no Trey White. And right now, we really don't have much behind those 2 players. Levi Wallace, his market value is $9.6 million, and I'm not paying Levi that. I mean, he's been nice, but I'm not going to give him that much money when I'm very limited with my resources as it is. So I'm going to let Levi walk, and to take his place, I'm going to sign Casey Hayward, 1 year, $3.4 million, a very solid veteran who can step in. And if Trey White's not ready, he can start. And if not, he can be a backup. If something happens again to one of the corners and they need to take some time, not take some time off, if they are forced to take some time off due to an injury, then Casey Hayward can step in. So getting into the draft here, I took Andrew Booth with the 25th pick. I think this guy is a stud. He's been mocked to go up to as high as 15 I've seen, and he played at Clemson, so he's faced a lot of tough competition, and I love that pick for the Bills at 25. Second round, I think this is where the Bills can go D-line here. Another guy that I didn't mention, Harrison Phillips, I think he's just going to be too expensive for the Bills. His market value was just over $5.5 million, and I don't know if the Bills have enough to bring him back. I love Harrison. I know all of Bills fans love Harrison Phillips and everything he's done in the community. So for this simulation, I cannot get him back. Maybe in real life, you can negotiate with Phillips and his agent, and he'll come back for a very cost-friendly deal. But there's no talking to Harrison Phillips this simulation. I can't just message him and say, hey, can we get this to go down on here? So that being said, I selected Travis Jones with the 57th pick. I think he'll be a great replacement. And looking down the line, another guy that I didn't release was Star Lotulelei, but I think he's going to be gone sooner rather than later. And Travis Jones can kind of fill that role, a big body defensive tackle, and he will be able to take the spot of Star Lotulelei and Harrison Phillips and be able to take on multiple defenders at once or multiple offensive linemen, which can clear the path for guys like Tremaine Edmonds. So then with my third round pick, I went with James Cook, running back out of Georgia. Now, this is a guy that has averaged over 10 yards per reception throughout his 4-year career at Georgia. He is Dalvin's younger brother, and I think this would be an absolute steal for the Bills. He is regarded as the best pass-catching running back in the draft. I thought about signing guys like Chase Edmonds, J.D. McKissick, Darrell Williams, but it's just so hard. You don't want to pay running backs, especially when you're up against a cap. This is a pass-heavy league now, and you just don't want to give running backs a lot of money. So I think if the Bills could find James Cook in the draft, they will come out looking like $1 million. Fourth round pick, Calvin Austin III out of Memphis. This is a guy that's put up over 1,000 yards the last 2 seasons at Memphis. He ran a 4.32 40-yard dash at the combine. Very speedy, very quick, very shifty. He's a future Isaiah McKenzie. If for some reason we can't get Isaiah McKenzie back, or after those 2 years he decides to leave, Calvin Austin, I think, could be the slot receiver of the future. So then you're still not totally satisfied with the wide receiver group because, again, when you hear Allen Robinson, Christian Kirk, and then it's like we only have Isaiah McKenzie, O.J. Howard, and now Calvin Austin III, I don't know if that's going to be enough. So that's why I took Tyquan Thornton, wide receiver out of Baylor. This is another speed demon. He's 6'3" on top of it, so he has size to go with his speed, and he ran a 4.28 at the combine. And this is a guy that had close to 1,000 yards last year as a senior and 10 touchdowns with the Bears. And then after that, I went with Cade Mays, offensive lineman, with the 183rd pick. And another guy that I have just fallen in love with, Matt Araiza, a punter with an absolute cannon for a leg. He can just boom these punts 80 to 85 yards. I'm sure you've seen some videos that have surfaced from the combine, and he even had an 85-yard punt in the game. And he holds the record, too, for the largest gross average for a punter. It was, I believe, 52 yards per punt. So this dude can absolutely kick the you-know-what out of the ball. Round 7, I went with the linebacker here, Micah McFadden. He can replace A.J. Klein, play some special teams. And then to round out the draft, I got Tyrese Robinson to shore up the offensive line. So there was my first simulation here. And then with the second one, I took a bit of a different approach because I think a lot of people think that the Bills could take a corner round 1, but then you can also take the avenue of drafting a receiver. So here's where it got a little interesting. And oddly enough, this is more in line to what the actual Bills are doing right now, because this is where AJ Klein and John Feliciano were cut. On top of that, Darrell Williams, Cole Beasley, Cody Ford, and Matt Hawk were also cut. So again, I cleared up over $20 million, had a decent amount of money to work with, but losing 3 right guards as they all played on the right side of the line, I said, okay, you have to at least sign someone back. Ike Bucker came in, stepped up, very solid in this year and in the years past. So I got him for 2 years, $7 million. Again, I went back to Akeem Hicks, Jacoby Brissett, and OJ Howard. And then I looked at this and I said, if I'm going to be drafting a receiver in round 1, I need to up my game a little bit more at the corner position. And that's why I took Desmond King. I would say Desmond King is a step above Casey Hayward. Now, Casey Hayward, again, a very solid veteran who has had a lot of great years in the NFL. But Desmond King is 6 or 7 years younger. He's been an All-Pro before, and he's coming off of a solid season with Houston. And I got him for 2 years and only $3.5 million per year. And a guy like that, I saw there was a rumor that he might be looking for 7, 8, 9 million. So to get a guy like that for only $3.5 million, I think the Bills would love that. So with the draft, I took Chris Olave with the 25th pick, wide receiver out of Ohio State. He's had 3 solid seasons with the Buckeyes. And this is another guy that can flash the speed, 4.38 combine. Not as fast as Tyquan Thornton or Calvin Austin, but as you'll see in round 4, I was able to get Calvin Austin again. So with the second round pick, I went back to defensive line because, again, I wasn't able to get Harrison Phillips back. So I took Fedarian Mathis out of Alabama. This is a guy, he weighs 313 pounds. So pretty good weight to him. Again, I was able to get James Cook, running back out of Georgia, Calvin Austin with the 4th pick. And then I tried taking best player available, as you always want to do with these mock drafts here. So I took an offensive lineman, Chasen Hines, and then I got the linebacker in round 6, a corner in with the second 6th round pick, Jack Jones, and then I found Matt Ariza once again, and Tyrese Robinson, interior offensive lineman, to close out the draft. So with both of those, I think those would both be real solid drafts and free agent signings for the Bills. I would be totally happy if they made 50 to 75% of those moves. And I'm sure Brandon Beane has a lot of moves up his sleeve. But again, the question is, what will the Bills do and how will they do it? And it's all based on the money. For as much as we want the stars and the big names and those guys to get us over the hump, I'm not sure if this is the offseason to do it. So don't be surprised if the Bills go into next year with 4 or 5 solid players in free agency that they added, 4 or 5 solid players that might be depth and role players. Maybe they can all be starters. I don't know. But it might not be the most exciting offseason for the Bills, but I think Brandon Beane will definitely make some moves to try to put this team in a better position next year than they were this year and try to finally bring that first Super Bowl to Buffalo.